Hi, and welcome to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. Our mission here at Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live well in spite of your mental health challenge by sharing insights through interviews, practical tools for living well, encouragement, and courage for overcoming all from a Christian perspective. And now, here's your host, Pastor Brad Hoefs.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I'm Brad Hoefs, your host. Our purpose here on Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live a faith-filled, rich, and full life in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. Well, today I can honestly say we've got someone special with us that's been a friend for a couple of years. Recently, I ran into him in Washington, D.C. We weren't there for the same meeting, but happened to run into each other, and it was great to see him. And I said, hey, I still want to do that podcast. And so he agreed. It's taken us a little time to get this scheduled because he's a busy guy, but I have with me Dr. Sidney Hankerson, who is a board-certified psychiatrist, and he is an assistant professor. Clinical psychiatry at Columbia University. So, welcome.
Thank you so much, Pastor Brad. It's truly an honor to be on your show, and I think, as we said today, it was definitely a God thing that we bumped into each other in D.C.
Yeah. Absolutely. We had met in San Antonio a year and a half ago or so, right?
Yes.
We were both speaking on the Pathways to Hope conference that San Antonio has every year. I really was fascinated by the work that you do. You have a lovely wife and a baby daughter, right?
I do, yes. My wife, Khadijah, and I have been married for 2 years now, and last May we were very fortunate to give birth to our first child, a daughter named Layla, and she actually today just started crawling for the first time. So
I love it.
A lot of excitement and a little bit of terror in the Hankerson household, as she is definitely mobile now, and we have to make the house more baby-proof than it already is. So we're really excited.
Oh, yeah. And let the fun begin. Let the fun begin. Yeah. Well, tell us about the work that you do at Columbia University and kind of in this intersection of Christianity and the Christian church and mental health.
Sure. So I have, just to give a little bit more background about me.
Sure.
I completed my medical school and residency at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And while I was there, I was really struck by how many patients talked about how important their faith was in either the recovery process or their pastor encouraged them to seek treatment. And so that really showed me how important faith is. Certainly on a personal level, my faith is very important to me. I've been, following the Lord since I was 10 years old, and my dad is a deacon, and my mom played the piano for the little kids choir. So, my faith has always been a very important part of my life. And so I came to Columbia in 2009 to do research to try to identify ways that we could engage groups of people that don't traditionally utilize mental health services, how we could engage those people into treatment. We know that more people in the United States, regardless of their race or ethnicity or religious background, are more likely to first seek help from a pastor when they're experiencing a mental health problem, instead of seeking help initially from a psychiatrist or a general medical doctor. So building upon kind of my personal experiences and that important finding, I started making relationships and partnerships with some African-American churches in New York City, and there was tremendous interest in addressing mental health and increasing awareness about it. And I first conducted some focus groups with pastors who told me that, there is a tremendous amount of stigma in houses of worship around mental health, but that if we partnered together, if we formed a real and authentic and sincere partnership in which really the pastors and the churches were kind of driving what we tried to do, that they thought that would be an effective way to reduce some of the stigma associated with mental health. And I've been doing that since 2009.
Wow. It's incredible. Now, is it mainly with the pastors in the New York City area, or it's broader than that, isn't it?
Well, I'm right now working mostly with pastors in New York City, and
Okay.
there are 5 boroughs here, and I have worked with churches in 3 of those boroughs, in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, and in Queens. But certainly I have done some presentations, like we did the presentation together in San Antonio, and I've done presentations at churches in South Carolina, and definitely recently was in North Carolina at Duke University. So there's definitely a lot of interest around this nationally.
Yeah. Were you with Warren Kinghorn down there at Duke?
I was, yes. I had Warren and I are, he was at the Pathways for Hope, and we have kind of become kindred brothers in this
because
journey. Absolutely.
In many respects, you guys have a lot of things that you're doing that are in connection with each other. Yeah, he's been a guest on our podcast, so our listeners may know of him. If not, you can check out that edition of Fresh Hope. Tell me, Dr. Sidney, in regards to the church, the Christian church, why do you believe there's such a stigma, or why is there such a disconnect? It's like if you have a physical, and not that mental illness isn't physical, but let's say you just have heart or cancer or whatever. I know stories of people that have received all kinds of love and attention from the faith community, and the pastor seems to know what to do and comes alongside of the people and prays and encourages them. And then mental health issues, nobody says too much. Why is that?
Wow. I think that's really hitting at the heart of such an important challenge of addressing mental health in Christian churches. I think 2 of the reasons that that's been a challenge in churches is because of some people of faith beliefs that depression, or certainly substance use, as we've seen the opioid epidemic, that mental health problems are due to either a lack of faith, you're not praying enough, or you're not tithing, or your faith isn't strong enough, or that it's due to personal sin.
Yes.
And so I think those two reasons have really contributed to making it difficult for churches to talk about mental health.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that it would end up to become stigmatized based upon personal sin. I liken it to the fact that many of us pastors have never preached against gluttony, because that's a personal sin,
Yes.
And it's all, and that kills people. That's a serious, you end up with a physical illness. It's interesting how that all works, isn't it? It is. We have our hierarchy of things that we think are worse than others.
Right. And I think, just to add one more thing to that, I think, I've talked a little bit about the church's perspective, but also there is some distrust from, I think, church members with mental health professionals. It's widely known that Freud, who is considered kind of the father of modern psychiatry or psychoanalysis, that he was atheist.
Right.
And I think that many people of faith have potentially been had their faith questioned, or may have had bad experiences with psychiatrists or with mental health professionals. So I think there's both those two kind of things have kind of created a divide.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, if I'm not mistaken, research shows that when people incorporate their faith into their mental health recovery, they get better sooner and they stay better longer. And that bridge needs to be built back between the two communities, really.
Absolutely. Because it can be a very, very powerful bridge. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Now, as you work with pastors, do you find that they struggle with trying to identify how to talk about mental illness, or how to normalize it, or even how to, the word mental illness doesn't show up in the Bible, but neither does heart attacks or, other physical illnesses. But do you find that they struggle with how to approach talking about it, or what is it that keeps them from being able to just normalize it and talk about it in the sermon.
Yeah, I think that early on, when I started on this journey, I think that there was a tremendous amount of struggle from pastors about how to talk about mental health disorders, how to just even broach the topic. But I think several things have happened kind of nationally and locally that are beginning to shift that at the local level in New York City. I've been fortunate to work with the New York City First Lady, Shirlane McRae, and she has created what's called the Weekend of Faith for Mental Health. And so during the month of May, which is National Mental Health Awareness Month, we have created a curriculum for pastors and imams and rabbis, faith leaders of all faiths, to have sermons about mental health. And, we've kind of provided them with statistics about how common mental health disorders are, where to get treatment, as well as words that are not stigmatizing. So how to talk about depression and substance use and suicide in a non-stigmatizing way.
Yeah.
And then certainly on a national level, I think that as, Rick and Kay Warren in particular have been very vocal about promoting mental health at Saddleback, the work that you're doing and having these podcasts and literally transforming and creating, treatment and recovery groups for people, I do think that as more and more prominent pastors are getting the word out about mental health, that pastors are getting more comfortable talking about mental health in the church.
Yeah. The whole issue of helping people talk about it just normalizes it. You know what I'm saying? If a pastor just brings up something about, here David seems to be suffering from depression, or Elijah has had this big experience and now he's in a cave, the emotional ups and downs, just all of that kind of stuff. It's interesting because it's there, but the words aren't there. And I think sometimes pastors just look for those words to be there so that they can talk about it. Tell me about your work with clergy and your experiences with that, and as you work with churches, some of the stuff that you do and that you're finding out.
Well, we've worked predominantly with African American churches, and one of the reasons that we decided to partner with African American churches is because African Americans have the lowest rates of mental health treatment in the country, and so conversely, African Americans have the highest rates of church attendance in the country. And so we thought that given the centrality and the importance of Black churches in communities, and we thought that really, and the importance of the pastor, we decided to partner with these churches. And so we did kind of 3 steps. We first had the focus groups with the pastors to address their kind of mental health needs, and they told us that partnerships were really, really important.
Yeah.
And then after that, we actually did the first ever published depression screening study, where we, went to 3 different churches, and we screened people for depression with the Patient Health Questionnaire 9. This is a 9-item questionnaire that most people may be familiar with when they go to see their primary care doctor. We use this measure to screen people at health fairs and at mental health focused programs. And the rates of depression were extremely high. 20% of the 122 people we screened positive for depression.
Oh, wow.
Which is nearly 3 times higher than that which we find in the general community.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, so that really showed, to kind of quote my pastor, Carrick Thomas, it really showed us that, churches are really not sanctuaries for saints, but they're hospitals for people that are hurting.
Yes.
And so doing that study and being able to identify a high percentage of people with depression, I was fortunate to get a grant from the National Institutes of Health, so it's a federal grant, and we used the community partnerships and the community coalition that we created to work with houses of worship, and we've trained nearly 300 people in mental health first aid. So we've trained pastors and ministry leaders and lay church members in mental health first aid, and the response has been absolutely phenomenal. People have been very excited about the knowledge they've learned from the mental health first aid course, they're really talking about how they've been able to support their family members better. And it's been an amazingly positive experience thus far.
Wow. Yeah, there's more and more talk about helping churches become mental health literate, or
Yes.
and there's just little things that can be done. It's not as complicated as one might think.
Right.
Well, what do you think is the biggest challenge that Christian churches or any faith community faces in regards to mental health? As let's say we want to become literate, we want to, what are some of the major challenges?
I think some of the big challenges for churches are, once they've perhaps taken a mental health first aid course, or if they want to increase literacy, is where do people go?
Yes.
So that we know that there's just such a lack of mental health professionals, especially in rural areas. I think that's probably the biggest challenge right now is the access. Where are people going to go if we've identified people in churches who need treatment? Where are we going to send them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest challenge.
Even here in Omaha, I find that people contact us constantly and say, do you know of a good doctor? Do you know of a good therapist? Well, it's hard to get people in. It's just hard to get them in because there's such a shortage. How do you see the peer movement playing into that due to the shortage? Do you think there's a place for peers to help within ministry settings or churches or whatever?
I think the peers movement is crucial, and I think is going to play an enormous role in kind of bridging the gap between supporting people who are in need of treatment and actually kind of finding treatment. So I think peers and community health workers or lay health workers are going to play a crucial role because there is such a lack of mental health professionals.
Yeah, I have a dream about having trained up hope navigators in settings where a hope navigator, my wife had breast cancer numerous years ago, and in that room when they told us that she had cancer was in fact already a navigator, nurse navigator for us. She was our go-to person. And I just think if you're getting out of jail and you have a mental health issue, or you're getting out of the hospital, or you're seeing a therapist, or your pastor, you talk to your pastor and you're not able to get into the counselor yet, or as you're going to see the counselor, whatever, that these hope navigators, if they're trained and certified and in more than just pure specialists, let's take it up a bit of a notch. I just would love to get churches full of certified hope navigators.
I love that name. I love it. I absolutely love it. And there's actually a big movement for kind of this whole notion of navigators. And I think churches are ideal places to do it because, you all have a wonderful kind of peer specialist model. And I think that peers in particular are may be able to reach people that, mental health professionals like myself can't reach because they're relatable. They have gone through treatment themselves. And we know that in terms of reducing stigma, contact with someone who has had a positive experience with mental health treatment is one of the most effective ways to reduce stigma.
I believe that, yeah.
So I love that concept.
Well, and there's so many things that I can do as a peer that just the professional standards by which mental health professionals have to operate, they can't do, but I can. I can be a friend that can be there, and come to your house if necessary or whatever. The other thing is I want to train on a lower level, just hope coaches. I'm actually preaching a sermon series right now. Our church just relocated, and we're kind of rebooting the ministry. And just teaching people how to speak hope into people's lives. give hope in, I'm working on a book with Amy Simpson. She's at Moody Publishing, and we're working on a book. I don't know what will happen, if it will actually get done and all of that, but we're talking about in it when you feel as though you're beyond hope, and the whole concept of hopelessness, if you ask me, is not a reality. It's a strong feeling, but if you're in Christ, there are no hopeless situations ever, but there's feelings.
Yes.
And there's definite
Absolutely.
situations that feel hopeless, and you have to work through it, So how do you speak hope into people's lives when they're experiencing feelings, not necessarily reality? Now, without Christ, I see hopeless situations. With him, I see none. But anyway, tell me about some of the newer stuff that you're starting to work on or starting to focus on, or where you're narrowing it down as you work with especially the African American churches.
Well, this notion of navigators, I think, is really important. 2 weeks ago, I submitted a grant in partnership with Dr. Jide Williams, who's a neurologist at Columbia, and we basically wanted to expand our church-based depression screening and linkage to care program. And we are, we propose to screen for depression in 30 churches and to use community health workers,
Wonderful.
which are the same thing of the Hope Navigators that you mentioned, to be able to, when someone does screen positive, to be able to help them support them and help them navigate the healthcare system and to get them into treatment. And so I really am excited about this notion of using kind of navigators in faith-based settings.
Yeah.
So we're really putting a lot of energy into that. So I think that's going to be really an important kind of initiative.
Yeah. Keep me posted on that, because
I sure will. I think you need to trademark that Hope Navigator. That's awesome.
I think I may have the the domain already for that, I believe. I also own My Hope Coach.
I love it.
I always get these little ideas, and then I go in and buy a whole bunch of different options for it. But the one thing that I see so important is when you're depressed, or you have bipolar disorder, or you have schizoaffective disorder, and you're debilitated by it, and yet you're supposed to navigate a system that's like hopping from one thing to another. It's like hopping from one pole in the water to another pole. I mean, you fall into the water so quickly and can't navigate the system that a friend to hold my hand, a friend to help me get from point to point would be so helpful from my perspective.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a big push for patient navigators and community health workers or promotores in Spanish in the healthcare system. And I think that churches are just a natural place for navigators. I think it's really, really, really exciting.
Well, here's another thing I'll put into your hopper. When you do these health screenings or the mental health screenings in the faith settings, I think you should also do, I've never done this, and I don't know if I could get mental health professionals to agree to it. And maybe I told you about this when we were in San Antonio, but I would love to see, how they have speed dating evenings for couples where women sit at the table and then the men change every X amount. Well, just imagine that with therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists, so that you get to interview a whole bunch of people at one time that are accepting patients. You know what I'm saying? And you have an appointment made by the time you're done that night.
I think that speaks to a wonderful point about really finding the right fit when you're seeking care from a mental health professional.
Yeah, because that can slow down it can make a huge difference if you have the right person right from the get-go.
Right from the get-go, absolutely.
Yep. Well, I thank you so much for your time today. Would like to ask you, before we conclude here, to just, if you would, just speak to our listeners. Maybe they're struggling and they're trying to, speak some hope into their situation. Would you?
To all of the listeners, out there who may be struggling emotionally, I just want to give you hope and share my personal story. When I was in my last year of medical school, I gained about 20 pounds. I was exhausted all the time. I really couldn't concentrate when I was working in the hospital. And there were times that I would find myself crying for no particular reason. And I really struggled to get help because I thought, I'm about to graduate, I'm about to be a doctor, I'm a Christian, I can just keep pushing and I should get better. But I didn't get better on my own. And I finally, took the courage to go seek counseling from a therapist. And it was the best decision that I made in my life. One of the best. And so I want to say to you that if you are in that place and have questioned whether or not that, you should seek help, just to encourage you to seek help and realize that things can get better, even though they may not seem that they are now. And I guess I will just close with my favorite scripture, which is kind of the foundation upon which I do this work, and my belief in partnering with Christian churches is Romans chapter 12, verse 2. It says, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind."
Yes.
And I believe that the notion of us talking about mental health in the church and seeking mental health services and support is truly transformational. And I believe that whatever your situation, you can transform for the better.
Yeah. Amen. For sure. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today, Doctor. I appreciate your work. I appreciate your friendship, and I look forward to hearing from you more. And let's get together again. Maybe we'll run into each other somewhere when we least expect it.
When we least expect it. Well, Pastor Brad, thank you so much. It's truly an honor, and I'm just inspired, by your work and your leadership in this area. I'm just grateful to be a friend and an ally in this journey with you.
Thank you. Well, my friend, we want to thank you for listening to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. We hope it's been helpful to you. We'd really love to hear from you. You can call us. There's an 800 number listed on our website, or you can email me at pastorbrad@freshhope.us. We'd like to connect with you on social media in any way, and we have a YouTube channel, and you can check out our videos. There's groups all across the United States and in various countries that you could attend, or you could attend our Fresh Hope online group meetings, as well as we now have a Spanish group online, and we'd encourage you to check that out. Please pass this podcast on to your friends and neighbors that you know that may need a good dose of hope. Now, until the next time, may the Lord fill you with His hope, fresh, new, daily. I'm Brad Hoefs, your host, and this has been another edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health.
You've been listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. If you have an opportunity, please review, share, and subscribe to the Fresh Hope for Mental Health podcast on iTunes or on the service that you use. We encourage you to share our podcast on social media with your friends and family. Previous podcasts of Fresh Hope for Mental Health can be found at freshhopeformentalhealth.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher Radio, and iTunes. The Fresh Hope for Mental Health podcast is part of Fresh Hope. Fresh Hope is an international network of Christian mental health peer support groups which empower people to live well in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. For more information about Fresh Hope, go to freshhope.us. Fresh Hope is one of the leading networks of faith-based peer support groups internationally. Our host, Brad Hoefs, is founder and president of Fresh Hope. He is a pastor who is living well in spite of having bipolar disorder. Brad is the author of the book Fresh Hope for Living Well, which is available at Amazon.com. Brad is also a speaker, blogger, hope coach, and mental health advocate. You can find more out about Brad by going to bradhoefs.com. Hoefs is spelled Hoefs. If you or someone you know is interested in attending a Fresh Hope group meeting, go to freshhope.us and click on Find a Group. Not only do we have local groups, but we also offer Fresh Hope groups online also. If you're interested in starting a Fresh Hope group in your community, email us at info@freshhope.us.